All right. Get on in, everybody. Come hop in the chat, leave some comments. I want to see if this is working. My first live stream. This is getting recorded. We are on the record, and that is what makes this interesting. So we're going to do this live. We're going to do it live. Not scripted. I want to hear your questions. I want to address them. And I'm just going to go off the cuff. All right, folks, thank you for joining. Today is July 7th. It is 10:36 Pacific Standard Time. Now, this is an important time. It's an important day. This is the 6-month mark after the historic Palisades fire. And this time of day is actually when the tone went out for the fire. So we had the initial response. Now, I had been tracking this fire from the moment it started, and I actually was tracking the resources, and I made this video several months back. But because the Palisades fire was such a devastating fire, I grew up in the Palisades, so I was born and raised in Mar Vista, which is just down the road from there, but half my family lived in the Palisades, so we spent every weekend off of PCH. My grandma, my grandpa lived there, my aunt, my cousins all lived there. So I know the place well. It's very near and dear to my heart. And, a lot of my family, they lost everything. I delayed putting this out because I want to be sensitive to the fact that a lot of people not only had their lives ruined, but a lot of people lost their lives. And unfortunately, the way that we discuss these things, and we're seeing it with this horrible flooding in Texas, is the discourse is so disrespectful, and it's immediately jumps to, the craziest, most controversial angle we could possibly have. And I think it's slowly draining our humanity. So my goal with this stream is to try to just be as straight down the middle, present the facts, discuss some of the controversial aspects of this fire. I have pieced together a very detailed timeline of the initial attack on this fire. So I've married up the radio transcripts with flight data, so we know precisely where certain resources are at a certain time. And so we can discuss the response that the LAFD had, how effective it was. The things that I wanted to go over primarily are the things that became the biggest story about this fire, right? So the first thing that came out was this discussion about a delayed response. And then there was the discussion about the lack of water. And then past that, who's responsible? Who is responsible for this conflagration? And this was much more of an urban conflagration than just a wildfire, right? Once one home goes, the rest of the neighborhood is kind of screwed. And then lastly, I want to discuss who did it. How did this fire start? Because we're 6 months out, and normally it does take quite a bit of time for there to be preliminary accountability with wildfire. Okay, so when you have a huge, devastating fire like this, it is pretty normal that it takes about 6 months to a year for there to be accountability. At least that preliminary accountability, like someone finally saying, yeah, it was us. The reason why that happens is typically because somebody or something very powerful is accountable, and there is going to be major class action lawsuits. It's very important that you cross all your T's and dot your lowercase j's with this stuff, because we have hundreds of billions of dollars on the line. So it's really important to make sure that the investigation plays out, and it's very thorough. But there's a lot that we can intuit about how this process has gone, where we can kind of guess where it's headed. I happen to have a little bit of insider insight into what happened, and we will get into that. But first, I wanted to discuss the primary issue of the response, which drew a lot of criticism. I mean, I don't think I have to go over just how much controversy there was online with that response. Everyone was talking about, the chief screwed up, the mayor screwed up, the firefighters didn't respond for God knows how long. Now, before we get into this, and we address some of these rumors, why are we listening to me? I'm just a filmmaker. I directed the feature film Hot Shot. It's a documentary feature about wildland firefighters. And I spent 6 years on the fire line. I trained with the firefighters. I did all the same stuff that they do. And I spent 6 years filming every single wildfire that I could possibly get to, filming it in 8K, 240 frames per second. And I did an additional 3 years of research in editorial on this film, where I was reading hundreds of US Forest Service studies, FLAs, university studies, trying to learn as much as I could about wildfire. And the thing that I noticed in this process, and the thing that drove me to make this film, is there's this huge gap between the public's understanding of wildfire, especially in California, which is the most vulnerable spot in the country. There's this huge gap between what the public knows and understands and what the firefighters know, what they understand. And the primary issue here is that firefighters, they tend not to get on a soapbox and talk about this stuff. And unfortunately, the media is doing a disservice to the public by misdirecting their perception of what is creating the problem in California. Why does California keep having these big fires? The answer is actually really simple, but it's like nobody really discusses it in a serious way, and it doesn't land. And like I said, the firefighters, they just put their nose down and they do the work. They don't want to be out front. They don't want to be doing live streams like this. So I felt like there's a void that needs to be filled. And my goal is to try to fill it with accuracy and honesty and as much dignity as I can muster, being who I am, and try to really shoot it straight, because I hate seeing this over and over again. And we are going to see it over and over again. So let's get into the first controversy with the Palisades fire, and that is the response. So this was the story that really came out early on in the fire. This is from the New York Post, which is actually just relaying something. It's a story from the Washington Post. So it's like the New York Post is just writing about the Washington Post, which is very interesting. I'm curious what you guys think about the Washington Post. What do we think about the Post? So anyway, here's the headline: delays and lack of resources, how LA Fire Department was late to the Palisades fire, according to witnesses. Quote, no one came. This is a very, very bold proclamation. No one came. So below the headline, we see it took LA firefighters at least 45 minutes to respond to the Pacific Palisades blaze when it broke out last week, according to records and local homeowners. Now, I don't know what records told them that it took them 45 minutes, but we have those records. We're going to go over that. Now, the timeline compiled by the Washington Post raises questions over whether the Los Angeles Fire Department's slow and lack of resources start may have allowed the blaze spiral out of control. Now, I don't know who edited this piece. The standards in journalism have fallen, sadly. Now, again, these are very bold statements. They're saying that the Los Angeles Fire Department's slow and lack of resources. In order to say that, you have to compare it to something. How do you know if a response is slow? Is it predicated on what you believe to be true about a wildfire response? Or are you comparing it to other similar wildfire responses? Obviously, we got to do two things. We have to establish how long did it take for them to respond? And is that normal? Is that slower than a normal wildfire response? Let's continue. Here's the timeline that they put forward, okay? And this is predicated on the reporting party. It says at 10:15 a.m., January 7th, Pacific Palisades homeowner resident Michelle Valentine sees smoke near the site of the Lockman fire. We'll get into that later. His wife calls 911 to report the fire, according to the Washington Post. Now, we don't actually know how validated this is. I've heard reports that they were blown off by dispatch, saying, "Oh, that's a little bit of drift ash from a previous fire and a burn scar in the area." Because if you remember, on the morning of January 7th, we had these red flag warnings, we had tons of wind. Now, this is totally normal. When you have a big brush fire and everything turns to moon dust, you will get these wisps of ash that whip up. We saw this all the time in Santa Clarita. Whenever there was a fire, it can look like a smoke column. And so oftentimes you will get a lot of false smokes called into dispatch days, even weeks after a fire, as a lot of that moon dust settles from previous fires. So if they were seeing some smoke coming off of that burn scar from New Year's Eve, it is quite possible that dispatch thought, okay, look, we're getting multiple calls of this. It's just a wisp of ash. That's all it is. Okay. That's not necessarily criminal, but apparently that may have happened here. They claim that they were blown off by dispatch. Moving on, 10:33, firefighters report seeing smoke and say they must divert resources from 2 other fires, according to radio traffic. Now, a fire had popped off near West Hollywood, the Sunset Fire. I think it was just like an acre and a half, and that popped off I think 10:27. So this is important to keep in mind. This is a very important detail, that LAFD resources were already committed to working brush fire. Okay, so keep that in mind as we proceed. Moving on with this timeline constructed by the Washington Post. It says that at 10:45, Valentine calls 911 again, but gets a busy signal, according to the Washington Post. Very interesting. 10:48, firefighters warn in radio traffic that the fire is moving with the wind and has the potential to spread to 10 acres. 11 a.m., the first firefighters arrive at the blaze. Remember that. The Washington Post is making the claim that the first firefighters did not arrive at the blaze until 11 a.m. Remember that time, okay? 11:28, the fire grows to 200 acres, according to radio traffic. 11:30 to 11:45, Valentine, who's the reporting party, sees the first fire trucks arrive in his own neighborhood. So the claim is that it took about 90 minutes, according to this guy, for LAFD to arrive on scene of a brush fire on a red flag day. If this is true, this is unreal. 12:20 p.m., first evacuation orders go into effect. 1:40, fire department reports the blaze is now 300 acres and growing. We know how that unfolded. These claims are pretty incredible, honestly. To say that the first responders arrived in the Pacific Palisades a little before 11 a.m., but focused their efforts on the foot of the fire near the Palisades Drive, the outlet writes. So according to this eyewitness testimony, somewhere around 11:30 or 11:45 a.m., as much as 90 minutes after his wife called 911, Valentine said he finally saw fire trucks pulling into the neighborhood. So this is just a guy saying something. Anybody who's ever done any investigation will tell you the least reliable source of information is eyewitness testimony. So in order to determine if this is true, did it take 45 minutes for a single firefighter to respond to the Palisades fire? Were they getting blown off? The only way that we can check this out for real is by looking at the real data. So what I've done is I have constructed a timeline where I've married up the radio traffic from that day from multiple channels between the LA Fire Department, air to ground, LA County. I've also married it up with the flight data that we have, which is time-stamped. And we're gonna watch this video. We're gonna watch this timeline unfold slightly in real time. Now, I've put an incident timer and a time of day stamp on this video. So it's married up with all the radio traffic so you can see precisely what resources were doing, what they were saying, where they were, and exactly when. So now remember, the tone went out for this at 10:30. It's not exact, but that's basically right when the tone went out. And this is how we need to judge the LAFD. Look, you could see a smoke and maybe it doesn't get reported until 10:30. Look, man, they can only act when they get the report and they can validate it. And sometimes you will hear over radio traffic, when there's an initial report of a fire, you will hear someone ask, how many calls have we had on this? And sometimes dispatch will proactively say something like, we've had 3 calls already. And that is an indicator to everybody like, hey man, we got to take this seriously. This is real. This isn't people just seeing a water dog up in the hills. This isn't just like a wisp of ash. This is the real deal. So we need to start our timeline when the tone went out. That's when firefighters respond. That's when the firefighters and the fire department had validated that there was an actual working brush fire. And remember, they were already committed to a fire. Okay, so remember that time of day that I told you to remember, 11 a.m. Nobody showed up till 11 a.m. Let's see if it's true. You guys ready? Let's watch this timeline. I may pause it here and there. You're going to see little jumps in between moments of radio silence. So I fast forward us to the times when we get significant radio traffic, something interesting, something that we need to know. And it's all married with the incident timer as well as the time of day. So let's check that out.
Students in the field, stand by for a brush fire in 23's first end. Engine 23, rescue 23, task force 69, engine 19, life force 63, engine 59.
Metro from life force 69. We have a significant loom up on this brush response at 23's. Let's start all available air dropping resources, and I'll give you a size up in a few minutes.
All right, I'm pausing it here because I just want to take note. This is 2 minutes into the incident. We can see here on the incident timer. This is Life Force 69. There are 2 fire stations that service the Pacific Palisades. There's 69s and 23s. There's a lot of controversy about where 23s was. There was a lot of controversy about where 69s was. Now, keep in mind, we are 2 minutes into the incident. You already have 69s saying they're giving like an initial size up. They want all of their water dropping resources to come in. And what you see with our flight radar data is that within 2 minutes, you already have LA City air assets lighting up on radar. ready to take off. And if you watch the background of this video, you will see the flight data timed exactly with the incident. So you can see where these ships are, how long it took them to get over the incident. All right, so let's continue.
Metro 69 copy. In addition, let's start me 10 additional engine companies. We have about a 30 to 40 mile an hour wind. And I'll give you a size up when we get on scene.
This is important. 228. He's ordering an augmented response immediately. Now, the normal brush response, it varies by agency, but it's going to be 5 engines, a couple helicopters, a couple dozers, a couple hand crews. That's sort of the standard thing. So he's immediately ordering 10 additional engine companies because he knows that this is going to be a significant incident. So within 2.5 minutes of the incident timer, they're already ordering an augmented response. And you can see that you've got aircraft lighting up in Van Nuys ready to dispatch.
Line 469, roger, 10 additional engine companies.
Confirmed by this.
Yeah, Metro for Battalion 9 en route, confirming the size up. If we have any additional engine companies, we could take 20 to our...
So now, 3.5 minutes in, you got Battalion Chief 9, who's en route, confirming the size up, confirming 69 size up, and ordering an additional 20 engines. So further augmenting the response. It's very clear that they see this as a massive threat to the Palisades, and so they're trying to get those resources going immediately. This is about as quickly as it happens on these incidents, by the way. To be ordering augmented resources at the 2 and 3.5 minute mark like this, they're not joking around. They're taking this very seriously.
Roger, just confirming, instead of the 10 additional engine companies, you want 20 additional engine companies?
That is correct. We've got a good boom up, and we're still in Battalion 37th District.
Roger, stand by.
Now, did you catch that? They're still in 37th district. 37th district is the adjacent district where you had the Sunset Fire. So he's coming over from another district. It's important to keep this in mind because there are a lot of people who are asking the question of like, where was 23s? Why weren't they at their duty station? Where were all these resources? Well, they had a lot of resources already dispatched to a working brush fire in the adjacent district. So
Instead of the 10 additional engine companies, you want 20 additional engine companies?
That is correct. We've got a good boom up, and we're still in Battalion 37th District.
Roger, stand by.
LA, Quebec 1 and 2, copy the response. Hell Tanker 55 will remain AIQ, unable to lift due to wind.
now we've jumped forward 11.5 minutes into the incident, and this is the Quebecs. These are the super scoopers that are based out of Van Nuys, copying the response. They're confirming that they're going to lift and head over to the Palisades incident, and they're pointing out that Helitanker 55, which is that Huey with the dual rotors, that big heavy Coulson tanker, is going to remain AIQ, available in quarters, unable to lift due to wind. Now, this is going to be an ongoing problem. You had very severe weather that day. Okay, so not only is aircraft largely ineffective in some of these circumstances because, you know, when you're dropping water in 60, 70, 80 mile per hour winds, it turns to foam. Like a lot of times it either misses the mark or it just gets too aerosolized and it doesn't have that sort of smothering impact that a good heavy drop would have. But there are going to be times throughout the incident where there's nothing the aircraft can do. They're going to be grounded. And you see that whenever you see winds like this.
Yeah, any IC on scene of the incident that's up above the Palisades from Fire 4 Helco on B1.
Now, this is Fire 4. We are 15.5 minutes into the incident since the tone went out. And Fire 4, which is a city helicopter for LAFD, is over the incident. And they are trying to hail somebody on the ground that they can coordinate with who's going to be running IC. It's incident command. That's going to be the first person on scene is going to establish incident command. So this idea that nobody showed up for 45 minutes, well, we know for sure that we had a city aerial asset over the fire at 15.5 minutes. Okay. So I heard somebody talking about how there weren't any city resources available. It's not true. They just had to make their way over from Van Nuys. You can see the flight path from Fire 4 hooking around and getting on scene. And what we'll see is there was a little bit of a difficulty raising ground units.
Yeah, any IC or ground resource up on B1 for the fire in the Palisades from Fire 4 Helco.
Now, Helco means he's basically running operations, but he's like coordinating the helicopters. What that tells you is he's not the only one there, okay? He's coordinating other helicopters. And as it turns out, there were 3 other ships there.
LA, you copy City Fire 4 on V1?
Fire 4, go ahead for LA.
This is LA County Battalion 5. I call.
So you can see there's a little bit of it's not even back and forth. It's just Fire 4 kind of speaking into the void, trying to raise somebody on V1. That was their initial tactical channel, trying to coordinate with ground resources to try to figure out fire attack. Now we are 17 and a half minutes in. Now look, yes, they're having a hard time communicating. And you see that finally Battalion Chief 5 steps in just to let him know, like, yeah, I'm copying, I can hear you. Clearly, they're having communications issues. That doesn't mean that they're not there, okay? And this is important to remember as we move forward.
Yeah, LA from Fire 4, just to give you guys a heads up, I've notified our dispatch center as well. We have 3 of our water droppers in here, we're working them. Currently, it's a 10-acre brush fire and heavy fuel on top of a ridge line. It is 100% in alignment with the wind. This has the potential for 200 plus acres in the next.
This is a very ominous size up. To already have 10 acres going with those kinds of winds in a rat's nest like Topanga State Park, where this fire started, this is a very ominous size up. And to have 200 acres in the next 20 minutes, he's trying to implore people that this is going to be really bad, really bad.
We have a potential for structures being threatened in the next 20 minutes. This is started up here in 23's district, just below the old burn scar from the Palisades.
You catch that? Who caught that? This started up here in 23's district, just below the old burn scar. Now, he says over the radio, he says the Palisades fire. What he meant was the Lockman fire. Now, there have been multiple Palisades fires. There was one that I went to in 2019. There was another one I went to in 2021. We need to figure out how we're naming these fires better. He's referring to the Lockman fire, which ignited on New Year's. And he's letting people know that this fire started just below the old burn scar. This burn scar is not old, it's 6 days old. This is important to remember for later on.
In 23's district, just below the old burn scar from the Palisades fire, but it is pushing directly towards Palisades, and this thing's got a wide path of travel already.
Again, this is a very ominous size up. It's got a wide path of travel, meaning it's going to be very hard to marshal enough resources to cover the spread and the sheer volume of embers it's going to be throwing into this neighborhood. The Palisades, it's a very complex area. There's a lot of narrow winding roads. It's not easy. So this is a very dire situation.
But this thing is going to make a good run.
Hey, Truck 69, are you on Chastain Way? What is your location? Are you on Charmel Drive? I need a location for yourselves and 23s and 19s, please. Truck 69 from ICG, copy my left.
Yeah, Palisades IC from 69. All of 69s and 23s is up on Palisades Drive. It's skirting these homes, but with a little wind shift. We got heavy brush backing up to it. So all of 69s are going to start doing structure protection on Palisades Drive, 1821.
Okay, copy that. I've got all of 69s on Palisades Drive for structure defense. Do we have anybody? Can we see where the foot of the fire is?
Now, what we're hearing here is that 25 minutes into the incident, you already have 3 engines, 19s, 23s, and 69s, doing structure protection. They've already deployed along Chastain, which is where the Palisades Drive terminates, okay? They're already fighting this fire. And they've been out there since 19 minutes into the incident. This next bit of traffic is important. He's asking, do you know where the foot of the fire is? Can you see where the foot of the fire is? Now, what he's referring to is what's called the heel of the fire, and that is typically the point of origin of the fire. Fires tend to be very directional, so wherever it's going is the head of the fire. Where it came from, it's not spreading in the same way, especially on a wind-driven fire like this. That's going to be the heel of the fire. Listen to what he says.
The foot of the fire started real close to where the last fire was on New Year's Eve.
Catch that? It's two people reporting that the heel of this fire started real close to where the last fire was on New Year's Eve. So you had Helco reporting that, and now you have engines on the ground that are actively doing structure protection. Now, we're 25 minutes into the incident, and you already have 3 engines that have triaged this area. They've already scouted. Now, normally when you have a wildfire, the first responding engine, they're going to go up to the heel of the fire. They didn't do that. Now, anyone know why that is? It's because they see an immediate structure threat. And so they're not even going to try to put out the wildfire component. They're just going to be deploying along these streets for structure defense. So at this point, they have already driven around the neighborhood, and they've identified that they need to be doing structure protection instead of even trying to attack this fire. So when you hear these witnesses who are saying nobody was going up there, they weren't trying to put out the fire, it's like, yeah, because they know it's gone. They heard that size up from Fire 4, and they know it's gone. They know that the primary threat is going to be structures. And so that's what they're going to be focusing on. So this idea that nobody was there for 45 minutes, it's a lie. You've already got helicopters. You've got 3 helicopters working it, and you've got 3 engines that are already doing structure protection, 18, 19, 20, 25 minutes into the incident.
With engine 23, engine 19 is right in between 69s and 23 on Palisades Drive, 1845 Palisades Drive is our location.
Copy. So we got all of 69's, engine 19, and engine 23 on Palisades Drive doing structure defense.
Yeah, Palisades IT from engine 19. Correction, we're on Charmaine, Palisades into Charmaine. We're on Charmaine, engine 19, engine 23, all of 69 is doing structure defense. To correction, we're also on.
So what you see here is a little bit of confusion. Look, man, this happens. And I think this is part of the reason why there's a lot of chaos sort of surrounding the recounting of this incident. We have people misnaming streets. There is a Charmaine Street or Charmel Street in the Palisades, and it's very nearby. They were obviously confusing some of these streets. They were saying they were on Palisades, but actually Palisades terminates into Chastain, and then over the radio he hears Cascade. Look, these guys are distracted. They're trying to save people. They're trying to save homes. So this kind of stuff happens, but it does lead to some confusion.
Our location right now, we're currently at the intersection of Floresta Place and Via Floresta. We have a fire backing down the hill towards.
So now that is.
We have a fire backing down the hill.
We're looking at 28 minutes into the incident. You have more resources that are even further down in the neighborhood. And they've got fire backing down into Via Floresta, coming towards some homes. So they've already set up structure protection as well. Look, man, you have to ask yourself, why are people saying that it took 45 minutes for firefighters to respond when we know for a fact that we have air assets there at 20 minutes into the incident, 18, 19, 20 minutes into the incident? Clearly, this narrative is a complete fabrication. And I don't know why people are running with this when it's so easy to verify that you had a helicopter over the fire at 18 minutes and he's working it with 3 other ships. Now, at this point, you've already got resources picking their way
Fire
up.
4, go ahead for LA.
This is LA County Battalion 5. I call
Yeah, LA from Fire 4, just to give you guys a heads up, I
I've notified our dispatch center as well. We have 3 of our water droppers in here. We're working them.
Remember that? 18 minutes in, we've got 3 more water droppers in here, and we are working this. 3 more. So in a time where, according to the Washington Post, nobody was doing anything on this fire, 18 minutes in, not 45 minutes in, 18 minutes in, you have 4 helicopters working this fire.
Water droppers in here. We're working them. Currently, it's a 10-acre brush fire and heavy fuel on top of a ridge line. It is 100% in alignment with the wind. This has the potential for 200 plus acres in the next 20 minutes. We have a potential for structures being threatened in the next 20 minutes. This is started up here in 23's district, just below the old burn scar from the Palisades fire, but it is pushing directly towards Palisades, and this thing's got a wide path to travel already. But this thing is going to make a good run.
Hey, truck 69. Are you on Chastain Way? What is your location? Are you on Charmel Drive? I need a location for yourselves and 23s and 19s, please. Truck 69 from ICG. Copy my last.
Yeah, Palisades IC from 69. All of 69s and 23s is up on Palisades Drive. It's skirting these homes, but with a little wind shift. We got heavy brush backing up to it. So all of 69s are going to start doing structure protection on Palisades Drive, 1821.
Okay, copy that. I've got all the 69s on Palisades Drive for structure defense. Do we have anybody? Can we see where the foot of the fire is?
The foot of the fire started real close to where the last fire was on New Year's Eve.
With engine 23, engine 19 is right in between 69s and 23 on Palisades Drive, 1845. Palisades Drive is our location.
Copy. So we got all of 69s, engine 19, and engine 23 on Palisades Drive doing structure defense.
Yeah, Palisades IT from engine 19. Correction, we're on Charmaine. Palisades into Charmaine. We are on Charmaine, engine 19, engine 23, all of 69s doing structure defense. To correction, we're also on Cascade.
Our location right now, we're currently at the intersection of Floresta Place and Via Floresta. We have a fire backing down the hill towards.
So I'm curious what you guys think. Now that we know that this whole 45-minute delayed response is a myth, and we have verifiable proof that you had resources over the fire 18 minutes into the incident, and you saw their flight path. It's a 10-minute flight over there, 12-minute flight. I'm not sure what you can expect from them. So now that we've established the timeline, the question becomes, was this slow? Is 18 minutes slow to get to a wildfire? And I'm curious what you guys think. Now, I think part of the issue here is that when you have a devastating incident like this, people get really upset, they get really angry. And so their first thought is, someone must have screwed up. Something was wrong with this. But I can tell you, I think it's kind of a normal response time. I've been on a lot of fires, and I would say that it's about, depending on where it is, it's going to be like 20 to 30 minutes. And the thing you have to remember, just in order for, let's say that 69s and 23s are at their duty station, ready to rock. It is 4 miles up winding roads to get to the general area of origin of the fire. So it's going to take them 10 minutes to get there no matter what. As it turns out, you had a fire in the adjacent district that resources were already distracted on. So here's the thing. Let's say it takes the bare minimum for them to get up there, 10 minutes, okay? How long is it going to take for them to assess the fire, triage homes, realize that, hey, we cannot be doing an attack on the fire. We can't even think about perimeter control right now. We have to just worry about structure defense. This is an effort that has to be made almost instantaneously. So how do you expect them to do it, right? How do you expect them to do it, and how fast do you think it's going to take? Well, as it turns out, we have multiple things that we can look into here, right? What is the average response time for a wildfire in LA County? Well, as it turns out, it's between 10 and 30 minutes. That's how long it takes, which comports with my experience on these fires. There were times when I got there before they did. It's not their fault. It's just, that's how long it takes to do this stuff. Like it's basically this. I see people in the chat talking about this. 20 to 25 minutes seems to be the standard. Yep. It's about right. That's about how long it takes. And it usually takes about 30 minutes or so for fixed wing to get there. This is pretty standard. Now, if you guys don't believe me, we have another fire that we can compare it to, right? If you don't recall, 2 weeks after the Palisades fire, we had another big wind-driven fire because we had another wind event. And I don't know if you remember it, but it was out by Castaic. It was called the Hughes fire. Now, that one was largely hailed as a brilliant response because, well, I mean, it's the ANF that was responding, so it's Chief Garcia, and he is the GOAT. But look, you might be surprised to learn that even Chief Garcia's amazing assets on the Angeles National Forest, they may not be any faster than the LAFD. Is it possible, folks, that this is just how long it takes? Right? That's the question. Is it possible that this is just how long it takes to get to a wildfire? You guys remember the Hughes fire? Well, it took them about 18 minutes to get aircraft there. Sound familiar? So, look, here's my opinion on this. These statements, these accusations that it took them 45 minutes to get to the fire, obviously they're false. We've proven that. We have this time stamped. We know where the assets were. They already had 3 helicopters dropping on the fire 18 minutes into the incident. So anyone who's telling you that they didn't drop any water for 45 minutes or 90 minutes, like they're saying, well, obviously they're mistaken, okay? And I can't blame anyone for being mistaken, but I can blame the media outlets for not doing this. Just marry up the flight radar with the radio traffic. You can triangulate all this stuff. You can even bring in the alert wildfire footage. It's all time stamped. Anybody could do this. So the idea that the Washington Post would run with this story when it's provably false, that you had assets there 18 minutes into the incident. I don't understand what's behind that, but I think the LAFD was pretty unfairly maligned. I've been around these guys. They're not necessarily wildfire experts, but these are as good as it gets, dude. And they don't treat fires differently. They always do their job. They are consummate professionals. And the reality is, guys, this is just how long it takes to get to a wildfire. I'm sorry. So it was not a delayed response. It was a perfectly standard response. Now, moving on to the issue, the other issue that really became like the biggest thing and the biggest talking point, this didn't win me a lot of favor with certain people because, look, there's this whole conspiratorial wing of people, especially when it comes to wildfire. They really want to believe the worst possible thing. We can't like bad things never just happen anymore. There's no such thing as a bad thing happening. There's always some kind of malicious plot behind it. There's some kind of evildoer. Like I saw people talking about how there's like all these pedos in the Palisades, and this was just to destroy evidence. But the biggest thing that people really latched onto was the fire hydrants going dry. One thing that I can tell you is I didn't latch onto that for a reason. Do you know what that reason is? I want to check the chat. Who knows why I don't care about the fire hydrants going dry? It's because it happens all the time. All the time. Here's the thing you got to understand about when you have a massive urban conflagration like this. You have plumbing going to all these homes, and you are in the foothills where you have a gravity-fed system from cisterns up above. And as the fire pushes through, look, you have residents who leave their sprinklers going. That's all fine. You also have firefighters who are drawing water from the hydrants. That's huge volume with their massive trunk lines. That's all fine. The system can't actually sustain all of that. Once the homes start burning, what ends up happening is all of the plumbing ends up getting severed from these homes. And so imagine every single fixture in your house is ruptured and water is spewing everywhere. So you've got, let's say 10 homes go out. You've got 10 homes now gushing water as if their water main were completely open, just gushing nonstop. So what ends up happening is you start losing that water pressure because the trunk lines that are refilling the reservoirs up above, those big cisterns that you see in these foothill areas, they cannot keep up. And with each home that goes out, it gets worse and worse and worse. It's just, I mean, it's like leaking like a sieve. This has always been a problem. I want to show you something. This is a very interesting documentary from 1962. This was created by the LAFD to document how this happens. And what's really interesting is the thing that I come away with when I watch this, it's called Design for Disaster. You should watch the whole documentary because it just shows you how there is nothing new under the sun. Nothing. And we keep seeing the same things happen over and over again. The thing that I'm struck by is when I watch this film, I'm amazed at how, like, dude, this looks exactly like what we see just about every year in the same area. So let's watch this together.
How can a modern water system properly designed to meet emergency fire conditions fail to function? Let's look at this simplified diagram of houses on a hill being supplied by a water tank above. When thousands of outlets are opened below the hill, water pressure is lost in the overtaxed main, regardless of the amount of water above the houses. Where the water supply comes from a distant location and supply pipes dead end on the hill, unnecessary use of too many outlets below the fire area simply drains the water out of the upper system. We have considered water, wind, and weather. Now there's the very real problem of how a house is constructed and where. Suppose we live in a house above the congestion of the neighborhood below, or in a stilt house built over the brush, or in the typical home with a combustible roof, wide low eaves to catch sparks and fire, and a big picture window to let the fire inside. Under any such conditions, there's not much of a chance. In 1959, experts from the National Fire Protection Association surveyed portions of Los Angeles. They found a mountain range within the city, combustible roofed houses closely spaced in brush-covered canyons and ridges, serviced by narrow roads. They called it a design for disaster. They predicted the Bel Air fire, plus others which are sure to come, unless citizens and city officials work together on a definite plan of fire defense. The prediction was nothing new to firemen. They have their own ideas about people who don't like water pumping stations or fire stations in their neighborhood because they feel that they're unsightly. Or homeowners who refuse to cut brush away from homes because it mars the natural beauty of the hills. And those groups who maintain to the last glowing ember that combustible roofs are not hazardous in fire areas, despite the fact that over 600 cities have outlawed them. Firefighters are thankful that such is not the thinking of the majority of citizens. But it does not take a majority to start a fire or to feed a conflagration that burns out the careful along with the careless. You are only as safe as your neighbor. When you live in a hazardous area, you're gambling that fire won't start from hot ashes, a cigarette, children with matches, a faulty chimney, auto accidents, a firebug, fallen wires, or lightning. These are the odds. If you win, you get to keep what you already have. If you lose, fire, the winner, takes all.
Isn't that incredible? I love this doc because it just validates so much of what we harp on all the time. Isn't that incredible watching that? How that could be today, right? You could play this today, and we're talking about the modern residents of Bel Air, Topanga, the Palisades. This has been an ongoing problem for decades. Now, we can ask ourselves, well, why haven't we come up with a better solution for this? And that's a very fair question. But the issue of water not being there, I know everyone makes a big deal about the Santa Ynez Reservoir being dry. And look, that's dude, the timing is horrendous. But look, man, things need maintenance, right? Apparently they had to drain it for maintenance. And if you were trying to do maintenance on that reservoir, when would you do it? I mean, wouldn't you think that, like, yeah, we're probably good in January, right? Let's make sure that it's online from July through November, right? That's historically when we have our big fires. But January, we should be good. It's going to take us, 3 or 4 months to do it. We want it done before July. When are you going to do it, right? So to a certain degree, it's like, look, there may have been some bureaucratic failures for sure, but the whole dry hydrant thing, it actually is very, very common. And I didn't take that bait from the beginning because I remember the Thomas Fire. The same thing happened on the Thomas Fire, and nobody made a big deal out of it. Nobody made a big deal. I filmed this on the initial attack of the Thomas Fire when it blasted through Ventura, and it was wiping out homes in the Ventura County foothills. These guys were trying to fill their engine when they had absolutely no pressure coming out of that hydrant. And resources were essentially, they just gave up, by the way. And they were essentially just relegated to standing there and watching the neighborhoods burn. Look at this. Look at this. These are Ventura County's finest, tremendous firefighters. All they could do was sit and watch. The occasional little spurt trying to knock down some embers, all they could do was drive around the neighborhood and watch this stuff burn. They were out of water. This is just what happens when you have an urban conflagration of significant size in these foothills. And the same thing that they were talking about in that documentary about how nobody wants to see these reservoirs. Nobody wants to change their vegetation. All of this is true today. Everybody wants to have all of these like bushes around their homes. They don't want to do the work. We got to figure out how we fix this. Now, even if we do fix this, would more water have helped, right? So let's steel man this argument and just say, oh, if somehow we had come up with a system, because we knew this was a problem back in the 60s. We came up with a system where we have constant water supply, where we can have 100 trunk lines, siphoning off water, and we never lose pressure. Would it make a difference? Now, who's been in an urban conflagration before like this? A wind-driven urban conflagration. Who can tell us how much water makes a difference in these situations? Let's look. I filmed this on the Saddle Ridge Fire. Saddle Ridge Fire blasted through, it started in Sylmar, and it ran through neighborhoods. How much of a difference do you think water is making right here? How much of a difference does this fire hose look like it's making on that house fire? And this is just one structure. Look at that. What do you think water is going to do for that? Honestly, what do you think water is going to do for that? Well, the answer is nothing. Nothing. Not only are you going to have that water being dispersed and aerosolized because of the wind, but it's like, I don't think people understand just how hot this is. It's like a blast furnace when you have winds blowing like that, and there's absolutely no stopping it. There's nothing you can do. Okay? Now, the key is the flammable stuff around your home. What most people don't understand is that it's actually not it's not like the big flames that really do in your house, because your house can take a lot of heat, surprisingly. I want to show you some footage from the Tanaha fire that I filmed. This is the Tanaha fire down in Riverside. There were no resources deployed on this house. This house survived. This house survived. Look at the heat that it's taking. Direct flame impingement. Look at that. Now, your home can actually take a lot of radiant heat. So it's not that. The real culprit is when the embers find their way into flammable materials around your home, right? Look at how much heat this house is taking. Like, this is nuts. This home survived. I'm watching this and it's like, oh man, it doesn't stop. It's just unbelievable. There's a lot of vegetation on these hillsides below. And what's crazy is all of these houses right here at the flaming front, they all survived. But a home like 500 meters into the neighborhood, it was the only home that caught fire. The roof caught on fire. It wasn't even remotely close to the fire. It was just one ember found its way in through the vent and found its way into the attic where it found some receptive fuels, and it was just bad luck. And that's why it's so important to try to like harden your home against embers. Let's go back. Look at this. Look at all this flammable shit in their yard. Why do you have palm trees in there? Why would you ever have palm trees in your yard? They're just going to catch fire. It's unbelievable. This was from the Thomas fire. It's not the direct flames that get you. It's this. This is a really good video that shows you how fires end up tearing through a neighborhood, right? So clearly some embers got into the gutter or the eaves or some kind of sheathing around this overhang, and it slowly starts to bite the eaves. And then the eaves start to burn, and then it starts extending into the roof, and then you just can't stop it. And the thing is, what it's catching on is clearly there's some pine needles from a pine tree just above that. And that's probably what it caught onto. So if this homeowner had simply cleaned off their roof, they might have actually survived. Once it gets to this point, there's basically no stopping it. Now, of course, he's hitting it with a shovel because they don't have any water left. This is the Thomas fire. See how it just bit that corner of the pergola there, right? Look at that. That's how these start. And over the course of hours, that whole structure goes down. It takes hours for houses to consume in a neighborhood. And so this is where you get a problem with just looking at the aftermath, and it looks like the entire neighborhood got nuked. It looks like Hiroshima. That's not how it goes down. It actually takes hours and hours and hours. And as you're watching it happen, when you're actually on the ground, you see how this house goes, and then that house goes, and then this one across the way goes. It's never just like this big wall of fire that consumes the entire neighborhood. There will be a point at which, because these things take hours and hours to consume, there will be a point where everything's on fire at once. And so when you're seeing that news footage, you are going to get this sense of like, oh my God, it's just a wall of fire consuming the entire neighborhood. But that's not how it goes down. So now let's look at how it went down in real time on the Palisades fire. This is probably the most instructive thing. Now, I pulled this from Fire Photo Girl's live stream. This is Brandy. Now, I want you to note that I put this watermark over this footage. There's a real annoying habit of certain people online to just take other people's work and not give credit or not give proper credit. The credit for somebody, especially somebody who's risking their life to go and capture this, should be front and center all the time. Front and center. Okay, so I've proactively done this. I know Brandy, I hope she'll be cool with me using it, but at the very least, you need to go follow her. She's always doing live streams. But what I found interesting was her live stream from the Palisades fire. I want you to take note of what's happening here, okay? Look at the neighborhood. Look at the condition of the neighborhood right now, and look at all the vegetation around these homes. They don't really have much of a shot, but it looks pretty calm in here, doesn't it? Now, we're going to come around the corner, and we are going to see the wildland interface. And the fire is just starting to crest over this ridgeline. And she's going to get out and walk over to her. Look at where the fire is. Now, as we get closer, I want you to pay attention to something. How far away does this fire look from the neighborhood? Dude, that's ripping. Holy mackerel. You can see it spotting into the vegetation below. It's pretty bad. But notice how the homes aren't on fire yet. Look at this. She goes down towards the end of the street, and you can see it. How far away does this fire look from that home? How far away? And yet it's still not on fire. What is that, like maybe 50 feet, 60 feet? So we got to ask ourselves, if the fire's within 50 or 60 feet of these homes and it's ripping through this brush, it's within 50 feet, but none of the homes on this street are on fire yet. What does that tell us? What does that tell us? The answer to this should be very obvious. If the fire can get within 50 feet of these homes and they're still not on fire, if we had cut a fuel break, even at 50 feet, if the fire stopped right here, the homes don't catch fire. If the fire stopped right here, the homes don't catch fire. So now imagine if we did the responsible thing and we had a 100-foot fuel break and that fire stopped up on the ridge. What if we did 200 feet or 300 feet? Look at how close, look at how close the fire is. And notice this home, dude. Look how close the fire is, and look how surrounded this home is by brush. This place doesn't have a chance. But look, it's still not on fire yet. The fire is knocking at its door, but these homes aren't on fire yet. So if it had stopped higher up, if the fire had burned itself out by now, well, then we don't have an issue, right? So what does it tell you we need to do? Now, I hear some people say that, like, well, no amount of removing vegetation is ever going to change anything because it's, you know, it's the ornamental vegetation around people's yards. It's the lack of home hardening. It's embers getting into the vents. Look, all of that is true, but where are the embers coming from? You're looking at it, right? So it stands to reason that if you reduce the amount of tons per acre, you reduce the amount of embers. And the other factor here is the convection. So the hotter this thing burns, the higher and farther the embers get pushed aloft, right? It's just like with a hot air balloon. You add more heat, you're going to get more lift. So the hotter something burns, the more long-range spotting you're going to get. Now, the fire it's well within 100 feet at this point. And what starts to happen is things start catching on fire. As we go back, remember that street where it was like nothing was on fire yet? Now look, it's spotting. Now it's finally starting to spot, and now it's hitting people's ornamental vegetation. So yes, the ornamental vegetation is the last link, and maybe it's the weakest link in the chain of the fire. But how did it catch on fire in the first place? That's the real question, right? So if we reduce the amount of fuels out there, we're going to reduce the amount of embers. We're going to reduce the amount of energy that gets released, that's sending these embers aloft and getting them deeper into the neighborhoods. And now look, dude, this neighborhood's screwed. They're absolutely screwed. So we see more of this. Here she is trying to extinguish some of the stuff. Good for her. But dude, it's hopeless. It's absolutely hopeless at this point. But I think this is really interesting. To me, it's really interesting to see in the span of a few minutes, her walking through this neighborhood, nothing's on fire. And then when we turn around, it's spotting all over the place into all the junk that people have in their yards. Now, if you guys don't think that clearing fuels makes a difference, I've got something for you.
The Silverado fire in 2020.
This is from my movie, Hot Shot. I was on a fire called the Silverado Fire. It burned in very similar conditions as the Palisades fire. So this was towards the end of the 2020 fire season in October. If you remember 2020 in California, it was an absolute nightmare. We had like 4.5 million acres burned. It seemed like it was never going to end. And then we had this super gnarly Santa Ana wind event in October. And of course, there's an ignition. The Silverado fire was a nightmare. There were 85-mile-per-hour winds. So you get this interesting A/B test, right? Where you have very similar fire conditions. And the thing is, with 2020, with all the fire that was already on the ground, with these major complexes that were persisting all throughout summer and fall, millions of acres, you had a fire hose shortage, all the resources were stretched thin. It was UTF everywhere. And yet, they didn't lose any homes on the Silverado fire. Here's why. Let's watch this. Ignore my stupid...
On the Silverado fire in 2020, the fire weather conditions were so extreme, fire was shooting out of the sewers. 85-mile-per-hour winds, among the highest winds ever to surface over a fire in California, sent heavy fire racing down towards the uber-wealthy community of Orchard Hills, massive flames threatening the multi-million-dollar homes. But the firefighters didn't even have to pull out their hoses. They just grabbed garden hoses from people's yards and tried to not fall asleep as they watched the fire hit the 300-foot green belt of mulch and succulents surrounding the community. And it took the piss out of the once raging inferno, and it fell weak and whimpering at their feet. The firefight was intense. Disappointed with the lack of action, the fire pornographers, who outnumbered the firefighters 5-1, were relegated to scrambling for desperate shots of firefighters squirting some water on an ornamental tree that caught an ember. But just on the other side of the hill, 2 young firefighters got burned up during a firing operation. Following orders to hustle up into the green to attempt to save some plants from catching fire in the middle of nowhere, they got overrun, and the fire ran up and over the hill to Orchard Hills anyway, where it simply burned itself out thanks to good gardening.
Gnarly, right? I always point to this because to me this was the most important fire, at least in the modern era. Because it shows how wise community planning, smart urban planning can immunize you from wildfire. And you'll notice the only thing that caught fire was these freaking palm trees. People shouldn't be allowed to have palm trees. It's like absolute fire magnets. So you have a neighborhood where they can withstand 85-mile-per-hour winds and diminished resources, and they don't even need to have a firefighter. It doesn't, like, do you think it really would have mattered if these hydrants were dry on the Silverado fire? It didn't matter. And that's the whole point, right? When you create a barrier and you separate the fuels, this is the most important thing, right? It's true in the wildlands, and it's also true in the urban interface. You have to break up and disrupt this continuous fuel bed. Now, it is true that once it becomes an urban conflagration, when you have tightly packed homes, there's not a lot you can do. And frankly, it could have been a structure fire. It could have started with a structure fire, and then all of those dominoes are going to fall. And it's almost impossible to stop at that point when you have everything packed together. You have to disrupt that fuel continuum. And this is something in the initial after action report of the Palisades, they've determined that, yeah, it was in areas where there was a disruption to that continuous fuel, whether it was distance between structures or someone's concrete backyard and pool. That's all that it took, right? And it just disrupted that continuous bed. But I always point to the Silverado fire because it just shows you how much you can do with just good gardening. And we are so stubborn that we're not going to fix it. So here we come to the discussion of who's responsible. Who is responsible? Let's go over a little bit of this. I want to show you guys something. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see how this goes. So now, I knew right away when this fire popped off that it was going to be really bad. I knew it was going to be really, really bad. Because in 2021, I remember going to the Palisades fire that popped off in April, and it ripped in 55-degree weather and 85% humidity. It ripped like 1,200 acres in April. It's not supposed to happen. This is not fire weather. The reason why it was able to do that, despite that sort of non-conducive weather, was because the fuels are in such bad shape. It is such a rat's nest in Topanga State Park. I remember going up through this neighborhood and going to the park boundary and seeing how dense the fuels were and how overgrown, and there's no fire history in decades. Man, I was a little bit spooked, and I started warning everybody. I'm like, guys, Topanga's going to get nuked. This whole area is going to get completely lit up. And sure enough, Topanga State Park lit up and it destroyed the Palisades. So the moment I saw that there was an ignition, I knew, yeah, this is not good. And I was tweeting about how the structural loss on this is going to be massive. It's going to rewrite the Palisades. Sad, grew up here, half the family went to Pali High. It was very obvious right from the start that this was going to run all the way to the ocean and it was going to destroy everything in between. And one of the ways that you know this is if you were to just look at the area. Let's see if we can get this stuff to load. Here. This was video from James Woods, shot from his house. Look at this. Look at all the vegetation surrounding these homes. They don't really stand. dude, how are you supposed to make it? Honestly. All right, getting a little bit. There we go. Let's get rid of you. Let's look at this area. Okay, we're gonna look at the map because Twitter's being goofy right now. So let's just take a look at some of the areas that burned. Now, the Google Maps satellite images have been updated, so we can see the burn pattern and where things got lit up and who got hit the hardest. So let's just take a slice and let's look at these homes right here on Maryvale and Glen Haven. Let's go into the street view and look at all these homes that burned up. What do you see? Fuel everywhere. Fuel up against wood siding. Fuel up against a wood overhang. Fuel everywhere. Palm trees. Fuel. Look at this dried. Look at this. Look at all this. You might as well have gasoline. Barrels of gasoline around your home. Look how deeply entrenched. Now, look, you are supposed to have nothing flammable up against your home if you live in fire country in Southern California. Look, this is a tough subject. This is more of the ugly truth and inconvenient truth portion of this. Look, man, nobody deserves to get wrecked by wildfire, but if you cannot help yourself, you cannot expect anybody to help you, right? The reality is Gavin Newsom is never, ever going to do what he promised to do. So knowing that, and knowing that Topanga State Park is always going to be a rat's nest and it's going to blow up, what do you do about it? It's the same thing with the climate stuff. What are you going to do about it? There's literally nothing you can do. So you might as well just be proactive and deal with the things that you can deal with. And that would be getting rid of all this stuff. You cannot have this stuff up against your home. You saw in Brandy's live stream how things start spotting into this ornamental vegetation, right? Well, we have more on that. Let's turn off our screen share. Here's some radio traffic.
Division Alpha. Our companies on Lockman have several homes burning. All the ornamental vegetation is taken off. They're actively engaged. They'll need more resources on Lockman as we're working our way across. I see from Division Alpha.
Notice how he's pointing out
I see
that the
from
ornamental
Division
vegetation
Alpha.
is starting to take off.
Our
Look,
companies
this is an issue, man. These homes are surrounded with this stuff. And look, the homes aren't on fire yet, but all of these bushes around their homes are. And then they're starting to work that fire into the eaves. And now look at this video, man. Look at how many firefighters, look how many hoses they have just trying to extinguish these small pockets of fire on the eaves. This is, to me, this is part of why the whole water thing doesn't really matter. Look at that. If you have a firefighter focused on just one tiny corner of one house's eaves, and you have another one over there and another guy over here, you've got 3 engine companies potentially babysitting one house. How can you possibly have enough resources to manage a conflagration where you have thousands of homes threatened? This unreal expectation, this burden that we place on our firefighters to be miracle workers when we can't even help ourselves. Like, why do you even have this vegetation under your eaves? You have to be able to help yourself first. Because look, whether or not it's the firefighter's fault, whether or not they screwed up or they didn't follow protocol, at the end of the day, if fire's knocking on your door, man, stuff happens. Ish happens, right? They're going to get delayed. They can't focus on every house. So maybe yours is the one that they can't focus on. Maybe, if you're next door to these people, all the resources are used up on your next door neighbor. What are you going to do? Californians really need to get their act together because this is unacceptable. The amount of vegetation that people allow around their homes and this rat's nest that we have is absolutely unacceptable. And we see these same results occurring over and over and over again. Now, I want to show you, we actually have a trail camera near the point of origin on Temescal Ridge Trail. Okay? This is what the fuels looked like. Look at this. Does that look flammable to you? Does this look well maintained? Look at all this dead brush. Look at all of this dead brush. This is just above where the fire started. Oh, hold on. I gotta share my screen. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Bear with me. I'm new. Let's do a screen share. Here. Bang. Okay. Look at all this. This is the Temescal Ridge Trail up above the point of origin of the Palisades fire. Look at these fuels. Does this look well maintained? Does this look healthy? This is what we're dealing with all over Topanga State Park. And it goes directly up against the neighborhoods. There's no separation. There's absolutely no separation. We saw earlier in Brandy's live stream, these fuels go directly up to these homes. Now, why don't we dovetail into what started this fire? This is perfect because look at where we are. What do you see? I heard people say that, oh, there's no power lines up here. There's no power lines up here. What's that? Now, the leading cause of wind-driven wildfires in Southern California, the most devastating fires that we have, is basically all power lines. You know, the Thomas Fire is power lines, Kincaid Fire is power lines, Paradise is power lines, Woolsey Fire is power lines. Over and over and over again, it's power lines. Now, here's the thing, though. This is a little bit too far north of the origin of the fire. It's a little bit too far north. The fire started around yonder. It's a little bit off, okay? Now, we haven't heard anything about what started this fire. Why is that? Why wouldn't we hear about what started this fire? Now, there's a few reasons why it would take this long to have an announcement. Look, if it were power lines, you'd probably hear about it by now, but the Thomas Fire was power lines, and people on scene, I remember talking to firefighters who knew this right away, and it didn't, I had to like keep my mouth shut because like it didn't become official information for like a year. Because whenever you're dealing with a massive conflagration, you're going to be dealing with a major lawsuit, right? Major class action lawsuit, there's heavy liability. So if this had been a wizard or an arsonist, chances are you'd know about it by now. And I remember talking about this. I remember talking about this on Twitter. I was talking about how the longer this goes where we don't have an answer, the more likely that it was not arson. Because if you have an arsonist, well, I mean, what? Why don't you just come out and trot them out? When you have an arsonist, you're going to just frog march them out. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to pay the class action lawsuit anyway. So you're just going to throw them in jail. So it's not like there's going to be heavy litigation or anything. It's just going to be a criminal investigation. You frog march them to jail. So the fact that we haven't heard anything, the longer we go without arson being described, the less likely it is to be an arsonist. I remember this tweet by Brandy. She had posted this picture, and I talked about the dense mustache of justice. The fire investigators in California are studs. They don't miss anything. And they have resources that you guys aren't aware of. They are able to identify things and track people in a way that you may not be aware of. It is very difficult to get away with arson. Nigh impossible to get away with arson. And I think the longer we go, the less likely that it's arson. Now, who remembers the Lockman fire? And who remembers that radio traffic? Remember that radio traffic that we heard earlier where they were talking about, hey, where's the foot of the fire? Oh, it's by that old burn scar from New Year's Eve. This is the fire they're talking about. This is the fire they're talking about, the Lockman fire on New Year's Eve. There's speculation on how that might have started. But what's interesting, and people noticed this right away, this isn't new information. People noticed just how similar the footprints of these fires were. Here we have the Lockman fire on New Year's Eve, which was promptly put out at 8 acres. And then here you have the Palisades fire. Let's zoom out on this. Look at that. It's basically the exact same spot. Just like the firefighters were saying on the initial attack, it started just below. Look at that comparison. When I look at this, I see basically that the fire's edge of the Lockman fire is like right here. That is the immediate heel of the Palisades fire. So there is a lot of speculation, and it's more than speculation. I've talked to some investigators. It's not my information to share, but they are very confident that this was a rekindle of the Lockman fire. Now, what is a rekindle? Certain fuels have varying degrees of heat residency where you could get, you're going to see it more commonly with timber fires, where it will be smoldering internally for days, weeks, months even. Some of the fires up in Canada were smoldering for, I think, up to a year, where on the inside of the tree, it's just kind of smoldering away, and then all it takes is one dry, hot, windy day to blow into it like a blast furnace, and it's going to flare up that fire, just like if you ever put a leaf blower on your bonfire to get it going again. So there's a lot of speculation that once this wind event started, that there were some embers that didn't get fully put out, or there was some, denser fuels that were still smoldering internally, and once they caught some wind, it flared up and blew out. And when you look at the footprint of these fires, it does sort of look like that's possible, right? Let's go back and look at some images of this. Turn off my screen share. Thank you for your patience. I'm curious what you guys think. Look at the comparisons here. Look at that. This looks like the exact same spot. Now, I believe the New York Times did this. Yeah, the New York Times did a good map identifying some of the landmarks around here. And you can see the footprint of the Lockman fire on New Year's Eve, the power lines that we looked at earlier, which, as you can see, are a bit too far north. Now, it is possible that there was a surge and some hot slag got thrown down off those lines, and there was enough wind that slag traveled all this way. I'm not that convinced. I also do have a little bit of a hard time believing the rekindle theory. A little bit, but it is possible. The thing is, like I said, different fuel types will smolder for longer than others. The fuel type up there, you think that it would go cold after a few days, but it is possible, and it has happened before. This raises some interesting questions. Let's turn on screen sharing. Show some video of someone who went up to look at the Lockman fire on January 1st, early in the morning. So this is a nice little video showing both the burn scar of the Lockman fire, but also the future origin. Oh, you can see the San Ynez Reservoir is drained. Also, the future origin of the Palisades fire, which is right there. Now, what stands out to you immediately when you watch this video? What stands out? What's notably absent? There's a part of me that doesn't want to say it. Look, it's not a 360-degree video. It's close. I don't see any firefighters there. That fire was put out. Just a few hours prior to that, right? Fire happened overnight on New Year's Eve. I don't see anybody there. Now, you got to take this with a grain of salt because it's possible that they're just not visible here. Maybe there's a patrol right behind him. Maybe there's a patrol down the street monitoring this. The question has to be asked is, did the firefighters properly mop up this fire? Now, what is mop up? Mop up is you're making sure that all of the hot spots are out. In order to have containment on a fire, you have to have a physical line around the fire. You have to separate the fire from the next bed of fuel. And you also have to remove all of the heat. And what this involves is a very laborious process of rakes and hoses where you are mixing that water down into the soil, trying to get any smoldering roots. That's the other thing is there could be stuff smoldering here that's simply not visible, right? Those roots could be burning internally. Okay, that's why mop up at that 100%, it's so laborious because you have to try to mix water, and you can see some of the residual foam here. Obviously, look, they were doing it. They were doing mop up. The question becomes, did they follow all the protocol to mop up that fire? And did they validate that there was no heat? Now, I've heard that they claim that, yes, there was no heat. I've seen images of satellites detecting heat on January 2nd. Well, that's not relevant. It's not relevant because we're talking about a fire on January 7th, right? Palisades fires on the 7th. So if there was still some heat on the ground on the 2nd, what that does tell you is if there was heat up there, they probably should have been up there. Someone should have been up there continuing to mop up. Someone may have been up there. Maybe they just went down to get some food. I don't know. I don't want to draw too many conclusions from this. I do know that there's a very active investigation into this about whether the protocols were followed and that fire was fully extinguished. And this raises an even deeper question. If this was a rekindle and protocols were not followed, who is at fault? Who's at fault? Does this mean that the LAFD or LA County is at fault for the Palisades fire because they didn't properly extinguish the Lockman fire and it rekindled? Look, I can tell you that typically, and this is just anecdotal, this isn't some kind of scientific thing, but typically when you see a delay in reporting on something, it's because something powerful is on the line and damage control needs to be done. A defense has to be mounted, and there's about to be a massive, massive class action lawsuit against someone or something that has the capacity to pay it. This is why arsonists will be busted right away whenever they have it. This is why if it was a vagrant, if a wizard, right away. Why would they delay on talking about it? They're never going to be able to pay. There's not going to be any class action lawsuit filed against a wizard who has no possessions other than a shopping cart. He's never going to pay for it. But power lines, a major power company, they can pay. So like on the Thomas fire, it's going to take a year. It's going to take a year before you hear about it. The city of Los Angeles, they can pay. They can pay. So if it were a rekindle and they didn't follow protocol, it begs the question, are they liable for the Palisades fire? Do we hold firefighters or a fire agency responsible for a fire if there was a rekindle? This to me is probably the most challenging question, right? And I don't know the answer because then don't we have to determine what started the Lockman fire? And then wouldn't they be responsible? Whoever started or whatever started the Lockman fire, wouldn't they be responsible? Like that should transfer over, right? Am I weird in thinking that? Because it's like, okay, yeah, it was supposed to be extinguished, but look, stuff happens. And it has happened before. The Oakland firestorm in, what was it, 1993? 91. Oakland firestorm was a rekindle. And it was very similar. It was very similar. In fact, I just tweeted about some of the similarities between the Oakland firestorm of 1991. 25 dead, thousands of homes nuked, billions in damage. This fire started from a previous vegetation fire that was thought to be extinguished, and then it rekindled under the wrong conditions. And it killed dozens of people and did billions in damage. Does the fire department become responsible because they didn't put it out fully? I don't know about that. I'm curious what you guys think. I'm very curious. to a certain degree, there's certain things that you can't help, right? It is quite possible that they followed all the protocol and they really did like bust their butts doing mop up. Some things are just hard to see. Like I said, you could have some roots underground that are still smoldering and you might not see it. Now, people were reporting some smokes coming out of the middle of that burn scar. So look, it seems highly likely that this was a rekindle. But if it's a rekindle, do we hold the firefighters responsible for not putting it out? Shouldn't we hold responsible whatever started the Lockman fire, since that was the original ignition of the Palisades? That was it, right? Well, what started the Lockman fire? This is very interesting. I want you to watch this video. We're going to watch it a few times. Let's loop this. So this was San Francisco Chronicle put this together. They did a great job with this. They lined up the alert wildfire cameras to show how the Palisades fire really did just start just off the footprint of the Lockman fire, just as the firefighters responding reported. But what's interesting to me in this video is they show what happened the night of the Lockman fire just prior to the ignition. I want you to watch this and tell me what you guys see. Watch. Boom. See that? Right before the ignition. I'm going to try to keep hitting this spot. Dude, it looks like something flew from the neighborhood up into there. Now, the initial thought on the Lockman fire was fireworks. There were a lot of fireworks going off. It was New Year's Eve. And I swear, man, look, there's a 2-minute gap. There's a 2-minute gap in between images on these alert wildfire cameras. So it is a time lapse. So there's a lot of missing information. But I swear, dude, I see what looks like something flying up. Look, see that? Do you see that? That light right there? That looks like something lit off and didn't catch. That wasn't the start of the Lockman fire. Watch, there's another one. There's another one up top. See that? Let's watch it again. Dang it. It's so hard to stop it right on the right spot. Boom. Something hits below the ridge and then something hits on top of the ridge. Now, to my eye, it looks like fireworks. To my eye, it looks like fireworks. I've spoken to people who are involved in the investigation. This is not my information to share, so I won't share it. I believe there is going to be news on this investigation very, very shortly, and I do not want to interfere with that, so I'm going to allow them to break that news. Keep your eyes peeled, because this is the smoking gun, and this is the $200 billion question. Who is on the hook for this? It could be that if the fire department didn't follow protocol, there is a serious liability there. It's very possible that they did follow protocol and there's just nothing you can do. And that's how it is sometimes. Like I was touching on earlier, it feels like we're not allowed to just have bad things happen anymore. Bad things never happen anymore. It's always some plot. It's always some conspiracy. I don't like that. I live in a reality where bad things do happen and people make mistakes and we don't hang them for that. But the one thing that I really couldn't abide watching all this coverage on the Palisades fire, besides all the crazy conspiracies, like I'm not even going to discuss the space laser stuff. I think that the LA Fire Department was very unfairly maligned. As we saw earlier, they responded to this fire in normal fashion. They didn't do anything wrong. It's completely false that it took 45 minutes for firefighters to arrive. It's completely false that they didn't have air assets over the fire. They were working the fire with 4 copters, 18 minutes in. We just proved that. So I think, in my opinion, it was a very typical response. They did the best that they could. And you got to understand, these kinds of conditions, when you have full alignment with the wind and you have a state park that is so overrun with vegetation that's dry and dead and competing for each other's resources, you have a fire trap. And look, man, I don't want to be histrionic, but everybody around Topanga State Park needs to understand that if they haven't burned yet, they will. It's not a matter of if. You are going to get the Palisades treatment, period. You have to accept the inevitability of wildfire and start clearing your brush immediately. And again, it's not to say that government isn't going to save you. That these guys really did their best. They did. I genuinely believe that. I feel like the response was strong. And I've been in enough of these urban conflagrations where you see how it goes down and how hopeless and helpless firefighters can be. We're going to go back to this footage of the Thomas fire. I got that lesson early on, that there's circumstances where there's nothing you can do. There is nothing. Are these bad guys? No, they're accepting what's right in front of them. They're accepting the reality of this. And once you get fire going like this, and you have homes that are so deeply entrenched in vegetation, and homeowners who can't even help themselves, they can't spend 3 hours a year clearing vegetation away from their hillside or cleaning their gutters, cleaning the eaves. What can you expect? These guys aren't miracle workers. And at a certain point, we're out of control. Take the lesson from the Silverado fire. Take the lesson from Orchard Hills, where they cleared out enough vegetation that they didn't even need firefighters. They didn't need it. And that's the ideal circumstance. So I'm curious to hear all your thoughts on this. What have you guys heard? What do you think we were looking at that started the Lockman fire? To my eye, that looks like a flare shot up there. That looks like a firework or something landed up there. I wouldn't be surprised if someone was shooting off Roman candles. And if that's the case, you can't even fathom the shitstorm coming for that person. The other question, who is responsible? Is it the homeowners who don't clear their vegetation, who don't take care of their own properties in fire country? Is it the fire agencies? Did they not follow protocol mopping up this fire? I don't want to believe that. Again, my bias is towards these guys did a great job. And that's been sort of the theme of this whole piece, is validating the fact that their response was on point. They were augmenting resources immediately. And I'm telling you, I've been on so many fires. They were on top of it. They did not drop the ball on this. I'm telling you. There was a little bit of communication confusion. There was radio problems of them getting out in the canyons. That's why it can be difficult to pinpoint exactly what was happening at certain points. But I'm telling you, they were on the ball. I don't want to believe that they really screwed up, but it is possible. It's highly likely it was a rekindle, and it could have been again, sometimes bad things happen. Anyway, just a reminder, you guys have to take care of your own home. You have to be stewards of your own property. You cannot rely on them to come and save you. It's not that they're bad people. It's not that they're not capable. There's just a limit to what they can do. And I encourage everybody to get a better education, especially if you live in fire country, a better education on wildfires so you can understand that it wasn't a delayed response. You can understand just how difficult it is to manage these fires once it gets going. It doesn't matter how much water you have. It's not going to stop. And hopefully with these videos, I've shown you just how impotent some of these control efforts can be. Dude, look at this. What are you going to do with this? How could you possibly think that water is going to make a difference? It's just not. Water makes a difference early on. And if they can maybe get to your house just as the eaves are going. But as we saw in this video, once the eaves get going, man, it's like you've got multiple firefighters. Look at this. There's like 3 firefighters responding to this house, just trying to extinguish the eaves, just this little corner. So extrapolate that out. How many firefighters would you need to protect 1,000 homes, 3,000 homes? It's not realistic, right? So we need to manage our expectations of what firefighters can do, even when they're absolutely doing their best, which I believe that they did on the Palisades fire, given the conditions that they were facing. It is unknown what happened with the Lockman fire. You're going to hear what happened very, very soon. Very soon. It's not my information to share. So just keep your eyes peeled. I think in the next few days, there's probably going to be more information slowly starting to come out. I'm going to be very interested to see what happens. And again, you got to take care of yourself, man. Take care of your own property and try to help these guys out. The agreement that we have with firefighters it's a two-way street, right? It's not just on them to protect us. We have to help them. We have to give them the opportunity to do that. And they can only help us once we help ourselves. Thanks you guys for tuning in. Please pour in the comments. I've been reading the comments. I've been trying to tailor my commentary around some of the stuff that you're saying. Phil, I really appreciate all the great comments on there. There's a treasure trove of really good information just in the replies. So if you are watching this replay the chat, because I love being able to crowdsource everybody's perspective and information on this stuff. And we'll continue having this conversation. I think I'm going to do more live streams because I like this. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in.